I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the Toyota Land Cruiser Prado, a vehicle that plenty of Australians swear by if what you need is a 7-seat wagon-bodied SUV that actually has true four-wheel drive credentials. Because unlike most family vehicles this size, the Land Cruiser Prado isn't based on a car. It has an old school, separate chassis, which makes it a great off-roader, and it has Toyota's best and most durable running gear underneath that really make this one of the most dependable vehicles you can buy if you actually need some bona fide trail ability, along with a surprisingly premium interior. And that comes from the fact that this particular 105 series Prado is the new Kakadu Horizon edition. Basically, this is as nice as the Land Cruiser Prado has ever gotten. And when I say ever gotten, I say that because the Prado is now really old. This vehicle is about to go into its 10th year, and there's no sign of it leaving our shores just yet. The 2021 model has already been confirmed, and that's going to bring stuff like Apple CarPlay to this infotainment system, although this particular car doesn't have that yet. What we do have here in this new Prado Kakadu Horizon model is a very nice interior, the nicest cabin the Prado has had. It presents really smartly in this sort of two-tone light colored combination here, although you don't have to get it that way if you don't want to. And there's still a really broad range available with the Prado in Australia, from a really stripper spec GX at the bottom of the range to a mid-spec GXL and VX, and then up to the Kakadu and the Horizon, this vehicle here. So you don't have to buy a super luxurious one if you don't want to. Now, of course, above the Prado, there's also the full-size 200 series Land Cruiser, which we expect to be fully replaced by a new model soon. The Prado is just a little bit smaller, most importantly narrower, which means it's going to fit down more trails, but we'll talk about that later. First of all, let's have a look at what we get here in this remarkably nice interior. First of all, in front of you, we have the 200 series steering wheel, which the Prado has upgraded to relatively recently. Little sort of light wooden, almost bamboo-like strip on the top of the wheel. It's kind of like a bluey grey leather, all your shortcut keys, and then you're looking through at attractive analog gauges. They kind of look like watch faces. They're quite nice. You do get a colour trip computer screen in between those with a digital speedo, and that all works pretty well. Casting our eyes over here to the dash, we have a relatively small touchscreen now in the Prado. It could be better. Runs Toyota's older software. It's pretty easy to navigate. We've got touchscreen navigation here, or satellite navigation I should say, Bluetooth audio, digital radio. Sound quality from the JBL Synthesis stereo is pretty good, and we do have hard buttons for almost everything. Climate control, and then all of your off-roading gear down here in the center stack in pride of place. Now we're sitting on reasonably comfortable seats, not the most comfortable that I've sat on by far, and the 200 series does have better seats than the Prado, but they're fine. We've got electric adjustment for the driver's seat, and we have heating and cooling on both front seats as well, which is good. Storage space also fine. We've got two decent sized cup holders here, a little tray ahead of the shifter, odds and ends storage here, and then between the seats we actually have a fridge, so you can keep a few drinks in here and keep them cool, which is great, plus big door bins. So up front, it's perfectly livable. It's more lush than you'd expect in the Horizon trim, but certainly falling behind, you know, newer car-based off-roaders or SUVs at this point in time, but I think it's fine. Let's check out that second row. All right, the Prado's doors open relatively wide, not as wide as some, but it's not too bad. Stepping in is pretty easy thanks to the side steps, and as you'll see, behind my own driving position, I've got heaps of space. In fact, it's nice and roomy here in the second row. Not quite as wide as a 200 series, as I mentioned, but very decent all the same, and almost a completely flat floor. So, you know, adults or kids alike will get comfortable back here. For myself, I'm 6 foot. Headroom is perfectly acceptable, even though this vehicle has a sunroof and also this Blu-ray and DVD player installed on the roof, which will give kids something to look at apart from the great view out the window of the Australian countryside. Now, to go along with the screen, we have the headphones, wireless headphones, got a few sets of those. Also got a couple of sets for those sitting in the third row, which we'll talk about in a moment and have a look at the space on offer. But back here, there are some more amenities. We've got a climate panel down here, heated outboard rear seats, luxury feature that we're starting to see pop up here and there. We have a fast charging USB port down here to keep iPads charged if you don't want to use this DVD player up here. We also have quite a bit of storage, nets on the back of the seats, decent sized door bins, and those soft materials from up front continue back here. You've probably noticed this vehicle also has heaps of grab handles, so if you are on a rockier trail, it won't be so bad for those sitting back here. Plus air vents here in the roof, meaning that the airflow continues. All right, we'll overlay some footage now of the third row so you can see how much room I've got as an adult and work out if it would be sufficient for your needs. And with that done, we'll head around the back and check out the boot of the Prado Kakadu Horizon. Now, the Horizon basically gets the option package for the Prado, which relocates the spare underneath the car. You'll probably be more familiar with Prados having a big spare wheel here on the back, which means as soon as you back into anything, you're going to crack the rear glass. So a lot of people prefer to have it down below. But interestingly, even though that wheel is relocated, it doesn't change the awkward way that the Prado's back door opens. Now, because it opens wide, if you are in a tight car space, you won't be able to open it the whole way. It would be nice if they had top hinged the door if you got the wheel down below. Not sure why that hasn't been done, but hey. Boot space, it's okay. You'll see that the floor is really high, which does limit your vertical load space, but you're going to be able to get a decent amount of luggage back there, at least in 5-seat configuration. If you deploy those third row seats, you are going to have very, very limited boot space here in the back. But as it is now, it's convenient. Your bags just slide straight in and out. We also have power adjustment to bring up that third row, which is really helpful. And a cargo blind here so that your valuables won't be on show through that rear door. However, a note on this interior combination, yeah, like snowy white carpet in a Land Cruiser. Doesn't make a huge amount of sense here in Australia. I can see it making sense in the shopping malls of Dubai. However, we do have separate opening rear glass, which, as you'll know, is one of my weird kinks on vehicles like this, letting you just chuck your stuff in the glass without having to open up that awkward rear tailgate. So with that look at the Land Cruiser Prado's interior and practicality taken care of, we can jump into the driver's seat and see how this thing handles on the road and on trails like this one. So what is the Land Cruiser Prado like to drive after all these years? Because I think it's fair to say that the Prado is venerable at this point after 10 years on the road, and that would be if we were being generous. If we weren't being generous, we'd say ancient. But you know what? It actually still drives okay, particularly in the higher trims that get the benefit of the KDSS suspension system, originally designed here in Australia. That helps the Prado and also the larger 200 series Land Cruiser from falling over when they go around corners. In fact, they don't, which is always a nice feature, I find. And actually, the Prado Kakadu's handling is definitely passable, but we'll come back to that in a moment. First of all, let's talk about what's going on in the engine department, because all Prados sold in Australia are now fitted with a 2.8 litre single turbo diesel 4-cylinder engine, and they have been for some time. There used to be a 4-litre petrol V6. A lot of people liked that engine, but it's no longer available. This is the same engine that is found in the Hilux and in the Fortuner. Same outputs in the Prado, 130 kilowatts of power and 450 Newton meters of torque. Now, we do think that this engine is going to get a power and torque bump next year to about 150 kilowatts of power and 500 Newton meters of torque. And that'll help because the 2.8 is a weak spot for the Prado. It's pretty slow, throttle response is sluggish, you have to be very deliberate. If you need speed, you're going to have to go all the way to the firewall, and nor is it efficient. So cruising on the highway at about 110 kilometers per hour, you'll find the Prado uses like 10 liters per 100 Ks. So it isn't that frugal in town as you'd expect for a vehicle of this size. It's like 15 liters per 100. So hopefully the new turbos that are behind that power upgrade will do the Prado some favors in a number of ways. They've got a 6-speed auto. There is a manual on the base model, but we think that's going to be scrapped soon as well, around the same time as that power upgrade arriving. So that's the engine department. I'd say that's feeling probably the most dated out of everything on this Prado. The rest of the experience is very trucky. You know, if you're used to a car-based SUV, this is going to feel really disconnected and not very cohesive. But if you are already in a Prado or a Land Cruiser or a Patrol or a Pajero, this is going to feel familiar. And you know, it's not a vehicle you drive fast. It's a vehicle that you sort of respect its limits and you drive within them. And if you're okay with that, then the Prado does the job without really any major complaints. The steering, mid-weighted, it's not too heavy, nor is the steering wheel too big, so it doesn't feel ridiculous or anything like that. And you just slowly get the result that you turn in from the wheel at the front end. It's no you know, sporty handler or anything, but as I mentioned, the KDSS system, which is kind of like an active sway bar system, really prevents the Prado from rolling too much in the corners, but still retains good articulation off-road. So if I was going for a Prado, I'd go for a Kakadu, because that's actually now the only model that offers that feature, which is something to look out for when you're specifying one of these cars. You know, on the highway or anything, it tracks nice and straight. You're not having to correct your steering input too often. And it's a pretty refined thing, engine aside. That engine's very agricultural and you do hear it quite a bit of the time, but the rest of the noise in the cabin isn't too bad. And as I mentioned, you've got a pretty good stereo, so it's a fairly relaxing drive. These things are all relative. Now, ride quality is acceptable. We do have the rear air suspension here, which can be raised and lowered from the center console. I would say that the ride is, you know, it's soft-ish, but a big bump will see that rear suspension traveling towards bump stops kind of alarmingly quickly, actually. And it's not a massively supple or comfortable car, but it does iron out the worst of the ruts and the imperfections. And then off-road, you know, it starts to make sense. The suspension setup is good for long distance driving on gravel, and you know, the whole thing sets up, you know, it feels like it's set up well for towing, and you know, it all makes sense in a vehicle like the Prado. Safety wise, we have adaptive cruise control. We do have a lane departure warning system, not so much of a lane centering like you would expect on newer vehicles now, but it works okay. We also have blind spot monitoring, we have rear cross traffic alert, and we have a 360-degree parking camera that helps to make the Prado easier to maneuver in town. Though that said, it has a big glass house and big mirrors, and it's far from the worst vehicle to park that I have driven. But of course, if you're not used to the scale, it'll be something of an adjustment. So that's a detailed view at the 2020 Toyota Land Cruiser Prado. Look, this vehicle is getting on in age, there's no avoiding that, but it still has a role to play because it is one of the only cars in its segment now that brings genuine off-roading ability. With the demise of vehicles like the Mitsubishi Pajero, it's now difficult to get these larger, almost full-size wagons out here in Australia. You can go for a ute-based vehicle like Toyota's own Fortuner, a Ford Everest, a Mitsubishi Pajero Sport, but they aren't as refined as an option like the Prado. And of course, stepping up to a full-size Land Cruiser or a Nissan Patrol brings with it additional costs of its own. But I'd like to know what you think of the Prado, so let me know down below in the comments box any of your thoughts. While you're down there, please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. It really does help us out a bunch. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.